Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Jeremy Moore with Assisted Living Locators. It's good to have you.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about guiding seniors home inside the work of an assisted living locator, because we find that a lot of people, decide that it's no longer time to stay at home and don't know where to go. And
Sure.
so it's really important that we have some people like you in place. So let's kind of give our listeners some good information.
Sounds great. Yeah.
So today, you think about families often feel overwhelmed when they're thinking about having to start looking for assisted living. What's the very first thing you help them clarify before exploring options?
Sure. I think kind of the first thing is understanding what level of care your loved one might be needing. Um, and from there, probably location of community. Location is obviously a big part of it. If it's easy to get to and from visiting your loved one, that obviously makes things a lot easier for family members. And then kind of budget, it would be another large one. All of assisted living is private pay in Texas for the most part. And those come with some hefty price tags from time to time. And so kind of understanding that general landscape would be kind of where I start with, but care being number one.
And see, I tell people it's food. It's always food.
Yeah. Okay.
Food, right? So
Yeah.
I said, you go visit like at 11, take the tour, they'll feed you
Yeah.
lunch. Then you decide if it's someplace you want to stay.
Sure.
So,
No, there's another excellent addition there. Thank you for that.
food's important. And so, but when you visit, you
100%.
visit communities regularly, right? And you get to see
Yes.
the behind the marketing and you're in and out of all these facilities. What are the
Exactly.
differences between what families think they need and what they actually need when you assess the situation?
Sure. Sometimes families come into the communities and they see, a nice brand new community that was built maybe just a couple years ago, has all these nice bells and whistles. But understanding where your loved one is in their care and who they are today, I think is a bit more important. It might be nice to have a movie theater in the community, but if your loved one really isn't into watching movies, it's not necessarily all that important. And you mentioned kind of the food aspect of it too. That's another important aspect of it too. But I think just mainly understanding the care that your loved one will be receiving at these different communities. Some communities might have a bit of a turnover rate possibly happening. So that would be something you might want to steer clear of. Resident to caregiver ratio is another large one that I kind of try to help the people understand. Some communities might have a 10-to-1. Some other communities might have an 8-to-1. If you go with more of a residential assisted living home, that can be more of a 4-to-1. So again, care is kind of a large part of it.
We talked about cost. It's something about cost. Cost is always a concern. And so
Sure.
it's about got to make our money last, right?
Yes, exactly.
So how do you walk a family through, helping them understand, pricing, the levels of care, what's realistically affordable in today's senior living market?
Sure. So when people start looking at assisted living, there's kind of two pricing items that you kind of need to look at. The first one, obviously, being the rent of the room. Those prices can vary from kind of on the lower end, $3,000 upwards of, $5,000 to $6,000 to $8,000 if you're looking at a 2-bedroom apartment or something like that. The second item would be the level of care. So each individual community will have their own level of care, their own levels of care that could range between a 1 to 3. Some communities have a 1 to 6. But that's basically going off of things like your ADLs, activities of daily living. Do they need assistance with dressing, bathing, toileting, eating, feeding, things like that. So as the more help is needed, those levels of care will continue to climb up. So if you're just needing a couple medication reminders a couple times a day, it might be on the low end, $200. If you're needing assistance with all those ADLs, it could be, $2,000, $3,000, even north of that sometimes. So understanding, the kind of two differences there is key. And some communities don't have levels of care. Some have an all-inclusive rate, which can be, attractive to some other people. Some other communities might charge you for transportation and kind of nickel and dime you on every little kind of extracurricular activity. And so kind of helping the family understand what those costs are and what surrounds those ahead of time can kind of help manage some expectations when going into the home to tour and things like that.
So we know from a marketing perspective that every community claims to have great care.
Yeah, right.
Right? But what are the specific red flags or green flags do you look for when evaluating whether a community is truly a good fit?
Yeah, as I touched on a little bit a second ago, those care ratios, if your loved one is kind of more independent on the independent side, those care levels might not, or those care ratios might not be as important. But if they are a bit higher of acuity, those ratios might be, a bit more important for you. Like I mentioned, the high turnover rate, things like that, as well as when you go and tour the community, getting to know like whatever hall you'll be on, getting to know the nurse's name that might be on your hall and having a chat with her, making sure you mesh well together. When we come in and tour, does the tour, the one kind of directing the tour or the caregiving team there, do they know all the residents by their first name or, first and last name, things like that would be kind of, green flags if you're looking at that. A high turnover rate would be kind of a red flag to me. Does the staff seem happy, with where they're at? It would be another kind of green or red flag, depending on, if they're happy or unhappy. Just going through the tour with the family and advocating for them, asking maybe some of those questions that they might be a little nervous to ask, to kind of weed through that marketing, is kind of my role and what I'm there for.
So you work with seniors who have very different needs.
Sure.
It could be memory care, it could be mobility challenges, it could be social isolation, medical complexity. How do you tailor your recommendations so that each person's dignity and independence stay at the center?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously kind of care is level one or number one kind of on the top of the list, but understanding who they are socially and personality wise, is also very key. If they're a bit more of a social butterfly, getting in, going to a community where they have a lot of those different activities and groups and outings and things, that might be a bit more important. If they're a bit more of a reserved individual, there's communities that they will still offer activities and things like that, but the community is a bit more kind of, I guess, a low key, intimate kind of community, a bit quieter. So those things would be important. If your loved one, used to love food and all those kinds of things, but is now unable to kind of participate, maybe they're on a pureed or a chopped diet, things like that, you don't need to go to the place that has 4 or 5 different dining options necessarily. And then as well, if they're in a residential assisted living home, that might be a better option, again, for those clients that are a bit more reserved and things and are needing a bit higher level of care to where, they're going to have somebody checking on them, every 30 minutes if they need so, versus some of the larger scale communities with those care ratios, as I mentioned, they might not get that, kind of, it's never going to be one-on-one care, but, you're going to have a bit higher level of care at those, if they have a lower ratio as well. If they're into movies, maybe a movie theater might be an option, but just kind of generally understanding not just their care levels, but understanding who they are as a person, I think is very key. As well, sometimes the families can come in and, we love this, we love that about the community, but that's not necessarily what the loved one might like. Or if they do have Alzheimer's dementia, they might be looking at them from their interests that they previously were into before the diagnosis. But now that's not necessarily where they're at nowadays. So I think meeting your loved one where they're at instead of who you kind of saw them to be is definitely key. And with the memory and Alzheimer's kind of dementia care side of things, there are communities that, you might have had a love for gardening. You don't necessarily need to give that up. We just need to find, a community that fits those needs, or any other kind of groups that you might be into. People sometimes with Alzheimer's dementia, they might regress, but they might still remember some key points or some key hobbies about their life that, they're still important to them. So really kind of digging in and understanding that, not necessarily who they used to be, but who they are today is key.
Definitely. And so, but for someone listening who doesn't know where to start,
Mm-hmm.
what's the most important step they can take today to make the search for assisted living less stressful and more informed?
Sure. Obviously, call somebody like me. I'm happy to help out anytime. But I think not waiting for some sort of, catalyst to start the search. Oftentimes, I meet with families. There was a fall, or a dad had Alzheimer's, and now he kind of got out of the home, and we found him in the street, and the police had to be called, or something like that. So getting ahead of those things would be key, I believe, to kind of help. I deal with a lot of families that, they had a fall or whatever it might be. They had to go to a hospital. Now they're in a skilled nursing, and now they only have maybe 2 to 3 weeks or so to kind of find something. And I don't think something as important as this, next kind of stage of life, next, place you're going to live should be made with a rush decision. I want people to have, adequate amount of time to kind of explore these needs. So yeah, just not waiting for, a catalyst to something, do some groundwork ahead of time. I think we can all say we make better decisions when we have a bit more time to prepare for those decisions. So I would start there. But also just kind of understanding that, it's not necessarily an end of, life kind of situation. Some people go into these communities and thrive. They might not have been a social person. Like, I don't want to go there. I'm fine at home. I don't want to be around all those people. But once they get in these environments, they kind of, break out of their shell. Some of this isolation can really kind of make people depressed and kind of down sometimes. And once you're able to kind of break out of that, I think it's, excellent that this doesn't need to be some sort of end of life situation. It can be, a new stage of your life, and, helping them understand that is key.
Perfect. So, Jeremy, if somebody wants to find you so that you can help them,
Yeah.
get ahead of the game and not
hmm
be proactive instead of reactive, because I think that's the message. And
hmm
how do they find you?
Yeah, sure. They can contact me on my phone. It's my phone number is 832-7. Sorry, it's the other line, 832-317-9222. They can also reach me by email. It's Jeremy or jmore@assistedlivinglocators.com. And as well, they can feel free to find me at my website. It's Southeast Houston. That's sehouston.assistedlivinglocators.com. And they can also fill out a little questionnaire on there, kind of their needs that they might be having. And I'll get a notification and be able to reach out. But feel free to call me anytime, day or night, the weekends. I'm always here for people. So, some of these things happen, at the drop of a hat, and I'm here to kind of pick up that. So.
Definitely. So, Jeremy, thanks so much for being on the show, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.